Welcome into the Chiefs Report by Chat Sports. I am your host, Harrison Graham. Today's show, we're going to take a look at 10 players Kansas City could sign in free agency now that the NFL draft is in the books. Let's start with a familiar face. How about Bashaud Breeland, who has spent the past couple of years with Kansas City and has played quite well, I would say, with the Chiefs in 2019 and in 2020. He remains unsigned. He is still out there on the open market, and with the Chiefs not drafting a corner in the NFL draft, I tend to think that they will still add a cornerback, and I think it makes a lot of sense to bring back a player in Breeland who, A, knows the system, and B, has played pretty darn well and is only still 28 years old. He's been a good contributor on this team. He's played like a low-end number one, high-end number two outside corner in Steve Spagnuolo's system, which is very, very impressive. I don't think he'll cost that much money. I think bringing him back feels like a good move. We'll see what ends up happening at the end of the day. Should the Chiefs re-sign Bashaud Breeland? Type Y for yes, type N for no. Get your votes in on this one. I vote Y for yes. Familiarity, production, knows the system. I think it makes sense. Go ahead and let me know what you guys think. Now, before we get to our next player, some of you guys have been asking about the Chiefs' cap situation. Roughly $10 million in cap space, and that includes the projected allotments for all the rookie draft picks. So I guess it's 14, 15, 16 million, but then you get all your draft picks signed. You're sitting at about $10 million. So that's real money when you get to this point in free agency. You can sign a couple of notable guys with that amount of money, so I think it's fairly possible that Kansas City could add a player or two. How about a guy like Richard Sherman? Say Breeland signs elsewhere, or you want to swing a little bit bigger and go for a guy like Richard Sherman. Now, let's be clear. Last year, Breeland was actually better. Sherman was banged up in San Francisco this past season, but in 2019, he was still a very, very productive and good outside corner. We know he brings leadership and culture to every locker room that he is in, and he said before the NFL draft that after the draft he will pick a team and he wants to play 2, maybe 3 more years and play for a contender. Obviously, Kansas City fits the mold of all of those things, so we'll have to wait and see. I'd probably rather lean Bashaud Breeland. He's younger, he's been able to stay healthy, and he knows your scheme already, but I'm intrigued by Sherman, so we'll see if that ends up being a possibility. Today's show is presented by the Newsbreak app. We've partnered up with these guys, and I love this app because I can get caught up with all of my local news and weather and politics and pop culture updates all on one feed. That's what Newsbreak does for you guys. Chatsports.com/ChiefsNB. If you go to that link, it'll redirect you to the App Store, and you can download the app today and get caught up on everything. The Newsbreak app syncs up with your local zip code, and you have all the stories aggregated onto one feed on your phone. That way you don't have to surf the web for everything going on in your neighborhoods and in your city. News, weather, politics, more sports content, articles, and videos, plus more Chiefs Report videos if you search for us in the search bar. Download the app today. It's chatsports.com/ChiefsNB. One more corner here, more of a nickel back. Brian Poole, who's probably the top slot corner on the market. He's been visiting some teams as of late, so he could sign very, very soon. Had a shoulder injury last year, ended up on injured reserve. Now, the reason I mention him is L'Jarius Sneed and Rashad Fenton. They've got versatility where they could play outside or nickel. It's very possible one of these guys ends up being Spags' nickel this year. Sneed played a lot of that last year, but he also played a lot of outside, as did Fenton. He plays both nickel and outside. I think if you look at the depth chart today, if you're playing a game tomorrow, you would have Sneed and Charvarius Ward as your outside corners, and Fenton would man nickel. I think that's what you would roll out there. DeAndre Baker being the wild card in all of this. Maybe they don't sign a corner because they feel like Baker can be a legitimate player. That's a little risky to me. The 2019 first-round pick for the Giants, we haven't seen him play in a couple of years, and he wasn't that good his rookie year. But if you wanted to add a solid nickel guy and, push Rashad Fenton back to that number 4 corner role, which is what he's been his first couple of years in the NFL, that is certainly an option as well. Brian Poole is certainly looking to cash in and make as much money as he possibly can. What do you guys think the bigger need for the Chiefs is? Do you think it's cornerback, outside corner, or nickel, a slot corner? I think it's probably outside because you've got 2 options in Sneed and in Rashad Fenton that can man nickelback if you need them to, but get your votes in CB or nickel. Next up is K.J. Wright. Now, the Chiefs recently signed a veteran linebacker in Correa, but K.J. Wright is a player that is still out there, one of the top free agents on the market, and it doesn't seem like he's generated the type of financial market that he was probably hoping for. So maybe a one-year cheaper type of deal could be on the table, and that could be a win-win both for K.J. Wright and for the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, he's on the wrong side of 30, and we saw Kansas City draft Nick Bolton, but if Kansas City doesn't think Willie Gay Jr. or Nick Bolton is ready this year, or that Anthony Hitchens continues to decline and he's just, a bit of a detriment out there, bringing a guy in like K.J. Wright could be very, very valuable. A guy who has played in a lot of big games for a lot of years for the Seattle Seahawks. He knows how to man the linebacker spot. Good player, still productive, had just under 90 tackles last year. Been a big fan of K.J. Wright for a while. He's been overshadowed because he's played next to Bobby Wagner. Next up, another familiar face, Justin Houston, who Kansas City released after the 2018 season because production was starting to dip, injuries were starting to pile up, but hey, put together 2 really good years in Indianapolis in 2019 and in 2020. Had 8 sacks last year, had 11 sacks in 2019 with the Colts, 19 sacks the past 2 years, and I've said it for several weeks now, I like this defensive line. I'd like it a lot more if they had a better edge rusher opposite of Frank Clark, because as of now, you're probably looking at something like Michael Dana or Taco Charlton as your other outside edge rusher. So not a great situation there. You've got some depth, but you could certainly use a higher-end frontline guy. I think Houston can still give you 6 to 8 sacks a year on a 1 or 2 year contract. I'm intrigued. We'll see where he ends up landing in free agency. Should the Chiefs bring back Justin Houston? Type 1 for yes, type 2 for no. I think it'd be fun. I think it'd be a great story, and he could chase a Super Bowl with the team he spent most of his career in. I'm typing my 1 for yes. Maybe you'd rather have Melvin Ingram, a player who we've talked about quite a bit because he visited the Chiefs back in March. No deal was made. Now, he had 0 sacks last year in 7 games played. A couple of red flags. A, injuries. B, lack of production. Now, 2018-2019 had 14 sacks, 7 sacks in each of those seasons. So he's not far removed from being productive. He's only 31. It's not like he's 34, 35. I still think he can be a good pass rusher, but the contract has to be right coming off the year he did in 2020, which is why I think for Ingram, there hasn't been much of a market for him because with the cap going down and players on the wrong side of 30 and playing poorly last year with injuries, not a great situation. But as previously mentioned, defensive tackle's great. Frank Clark, good player. That other edge spot, question marks with Taco Charlton, Michael Dana, and the rest of those guys. So I think Melvin Ingram could be an interesting option for Kansas City, but no deal was made after the initial visit. Maybe some medical deals did not check out. We'll see if something happens in the near future. Subscribe to the Kansas City Chiefs Report because we're uploading 5+ videos per week. We're trying to get to a point where we can publish every single day. We're close, but we need more subscribers to do that. Hit that big red button and subscribe today. Recently crossed 16,000 subs. Let's keep the train moving. Let's get to 17K as soon as possible. Let's look at some offensive free agents. Golden Tate, the wide receiver. Now, Kansas City has a lot of wide receivers, and Golden Tate certainly has seen his production dip in recent years. But A, the Chiefs don't really have a number 2 receiver, which I don't know that Golden Tate can be that. But B, a lot of their wide receiver room behind Tyreek Hill, young and inexperienced. Now, guys like Demarcus Robinson and Mecole Hardman have played a decent amount the past couple of years, but they're still young and up-and-coming players. Byron Pringle, same deal. Kansas City drafted Cornell Powell, who I'm intrigued with. I think he has some upside, but I don't know that he's ready to be a legitimate weapon on the outside as a rookie. Now, Kansas City has plenty of bodies at receiver, but if they want someone who can be more reliable, maybe a guy like Golden Tate makes some sense, even though he's lacked in production. At least that's dipped in the past couple of seasons. I like Golden Tate. He's a good slot receiver. I would explore this, but I wouldn't say it's a major need by any means. Tyler Eifert, we saw the Chiefs trade up for Noah Gray, the tight end out of Duke, but I still think they could use a solid, reliable number 2 tight end behind Travis Kelce. That's been an issue the last few years. They haven't had that good number 2 tight end, and Eifert's been able to stay healthy the past couple of years. He's put together 2 solid seasons. Now, he's not Pro Bowl Tyler Eifert, where he was catching, 60 passes for 750 yards and 8 touchdowns, but can he give you 30 to 40 catches and 350 to 500 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns? I think so. In this offense, he could block a little bit. I like Eifert. I think he's a good number 2 tight end. I think he should be someone Kansas City considers. Trey Burton is another player that, look, if it's super cheap, I'm intrigued. He's a good receiving tight end. Injuries have been an issue in recent years. He doesn't block much, so he would be purely similar to what they were hoping they'd get out of Ricky Seals-Jones last season, maybe a red zone type of player that you can work in some 2 tight end sets. But if it's cheap, I think in this offense he's intriguing. He can work the seam pretty well as a receiving type of tight end. Was able to play in 13 games last year after a couple of injury-riddled seasons in Chicago the couple of years prior, but he certainly is, starting to fade in his career because injuries have piled up. Ignore the age of 29. He's a little bit older in terms of football mileage, but hey, him, Tyler Eifert, you could certainly use another veteran tight end in this locker room. Pick a tight end, type E for Eifert, type B for Burton. I think I'd rather have Eifert. He's more well-rounded. He can block, but get your votes in on this one. And then let's wrap up with maybe the most familiar face. How about Mitchell Schwartz? Listen, ideally, Lucas Niang emerges and is your next right tackle for the next decade. You also have Mike Remmers there, who you've paid a decent amount of money to, who can start at right tackle as well. But if you're not comfortable there and you think Schwartz is healthy and you want to get him back for cheap, I'm open to it on a 1-year contract. Listen, you got $10 million in cap space now. You can bring back Mitchell Schwartz. Now, I think there's legitimate back concerns. He wasn't that good when he played last year in those 6 games. I think that was largely due to the back problems, but you get into camp, you have an injury, or Remmers isn't looking very good, or Niang's not ready to go for another year, because remember, this is basically Lucas Niang's rookie season because he opted out this past year. So right now, I've got Remmers penciled in as the starter because he's a veteran. He played fairly well at right tackle last year, but if they think Schwartz is healthy and if he wants to return for cheap, I'm certainly open to that idea. So there you go, 10 players that Kansas City can sign in free agency. Got some money to spend, $10 million. Name a player that you guys think the Chiefs should sign. Maybe I'm missing someone. I think these are all players that are intriguing. But if there's someone else, or if you agree with one of my names, just type it down below, and we'll see you next time.